okay?
Yes, great. Thank you very much. Yeah. Okay, so I'm pleased as usual to have AJ Alavari, friend of mine from a Quran class, but he's not a Muslim. He's an atheist, and that's kind of a theme that I try to hold in all of these discussions. I have a problem. I think atheism and liberalism causes a lot of problems in individual lives as well as at a world level, and we pick up different interesting topics. I really appreciate Alavari um, being open to all these, let's say, uh, questionings of his beliefs and all this kind of stuff on our streams. So I appreciate that we do that regularly. It's actually him who chose to do it in an open way. And it's also supposed to be, not also, it's supposed to be primarily us connecting and talking about like how's life going. And I think last time the video was less popular. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invert it. We'll talk about the topic, and then last 20 minutes we're going to chill and just talk about life and how's it going and all that kind of stuff, right? So let's try that. Okay, so as I was saying, I think there are a lot of problems with what I would call liberalism, which is this idea of sort of a focus on anything is possible. There aren't hard and fast rules to life that you have to figure it all out yourself, and freedom is central to all of that. That might sound all wonderful, but I'm going to point out very quickly here some issues with it. Maybe I'm wrong. Let's see what happens. So maybe I'll quickly present this verse of the Quran. We're going to be talking about um, the environment, but we're going to take an interesting angle, I think, that most people don't consider. So, AJ, and I are both interested in the Quran and contemplating it. So, I appreciate him. Uh, like, I like that he contemplates these things as well. Maybe he'll share some ideas on this. So, there's a verse of the Quran that says, "And He, that is God, created horses and mules and asses, that you may ride them, and as a source of beauty, and He will create what you do not yet know." So we're talking about modes of transport, and then God will create even more modes of transport. And I think we as human beings are constantly inspired, and one of those inspirations caused the, the creation of cars. And you might say that's stretching it, but there's also some ideas surrounding that. So, like for example, oil was found, large amounts of oil was found around the same time to make cars even possible. Why is that? What's that got to do with the environment and fixing and solving the problem with the environment? It gives you, if you have that perspective that God exists and the things that are keeping us alive and maintaining our lives, things like cars and whatever, and so we can progress as the human race grows, um, then you stop worrying and you see a bigger picture. And there's a bigger picture that people are beginning to realize, I think, is, for example, that we're not in a climate crisis as such, that carbon dioxide is actually good for us. So carbon dioxide is formed from essentially life, dead dinosaurs, dead plant life from millennia ago, millions of years ago, I should say. And it's just being recycled, just being pumped back into the air. And we, at the time of the dinosaurs, we had, I think, 10 times the amount of carbon dioxide, about 10 degrees hotter, and there was far more life. And I think there might be an unnecessary resistance to, and also there's a massive uh, global greening that is not given much attention. 10% increase since the 1980s in terms of greening. How many people don't know about this very important fact? So if you see this picture of like God's got it handled, we just have to do as much as we can, and we're not constantly in an existential crisis. If you don't believe in God, then you don't see the patterns. You don't think we're being taken care of. And also you feel the need to have a crisis to solve because you've got an emptiness that you need a purpose. Yeah, which God you don't have because you don't have God. That's my long introduction. AJ, share how you feel about that, please.
I think the Quran does have quite inspiring verses that inform us to study the world around us, to walk humbly and be part of creation, not try to, in some sense, dominate creation or think that creation, we're the only thing that matters in creation. So those are all very good. And we've discussed belief in God before. I have no problem people believing in God and an Almighty if that's what they need to get out of bed in the morning. But there is a danger there, because if I read my Revelation book and I believe in my idea of a God, and then I spend 5 minutes, on the Wikipedia page for CO2, and then I think, oh, okay, because I believe in a God and because I've done, 5 minutes of homework on CO2, therefore, whatever my understanding is must be what God intended. So just because there may be a God and just because there may be a revelation doesn't mean that we as individuals have understood it properly, or just because the greening of the world or the idea that CO2 is necessary for some forms of life, just because that might be a new thing to us, doesn't mean that it's a new thing to the entire field of climate science. And it doesn't mean that, for example, that hasn't been written about and spoken about in papers going back decades. I mean, if we go to a climate science conference and say, hey guys, I'm going to blow your mind, CO2 is actually good, necessary for the environment, you'll be laughed out of the room, because most sensible people know that. Most people who've spent, who paid attention in geography class or in biology class will know this. And that's not anything shocking or new. So again, there's a societal
Tell
problem.
me what is bad though. To point out what is bad about CO2.
What's bad
Because
about
you said I'd be
CO2?
laughed at. If I didn't know,
No,
if I
no,
didn't pay attention to geography class, and I'd be laughed out
yeah,
of a
yeah,
class.
exactly. Because
All this kind of stuff.
what
But yeah,
I'm
give me an example
yeah,
of
well,
what is wrong with
that is an
CO2.
example. So that's an example of, I think, a quite limited perspective and knowledge and background knowledge on what the greenhouse effect is, what climate science has been doing for decades. So climate
Enlighten me.
science.
That's what I didn't. So far, I've
Mm.
just heard. I'm being difficult because AJ's a good friend. Okay. So far, what you've just done is given me is ad hominem. You haven't given me facts, counter.
No, because you've
What
said
you've given is
when you started, no, it was not ad
yeah,
hominem. When you said,
yeah.
how many people don't know, and CO2 is actually good for the environment. You were sort of introducing that as like a, you know, as some
Sure.
kind of
I'm sure
a
there's
novel
loads of people who
reminder.
did. Yeah. Give me
Yeah,
counter
that could
evidence
be.
because just saying I'll be laughed out. I don't mind the
That
idea
could
of
be.
being told that I'll be laughed out of a
Sure.
climate
Yeah.
class
I'm not.
as well.
I'm not
That's
saying
just
that you
ad
would be.
hominem.
You would have. I'm not saying you would have minded that. But If you go back to what I started saying was,
Yeah.
how long or how seriously have we looked into climate science? I mean, getting factoids like the world is greening and CO2 is necessary for life. Let's if we are going to refer to the mass of the public out there, let's have some evidence. Otherwise, let's just talk between us two.
Well, I gave plenty of
So
evidence. I gave numbers. I gave all sorts of
no.
lots.
The evidence, the evidence of the how new it is or how unexpected it is that people don't know
No,
that
I said,
plants require
did you hear the bit
CO2.
of when I mentioned the dinosaurs and how they
That
had far?
we're talking about
Yeah.
different things. Mike,
Okay.
you seem to be making the claim that when you say no mistake, CO2s from cars is good, it causes global greening, right? So you're kind of presenting that as a new form of information or something
I
that
did.
people are
That's
not aware of.
doesn't really matter. Is it the fact that the
Mm.
real? Remember, we had discussion before. We're trying to get to the root of the discussion, like what we're really
Yes,
talking about.
yeah,
So it's a side issue if somebody thought it was a new or not. The real issue
exactly.
is
I'm
CO2.
making that issue. I just made the point that please reconsider. And within the climate science community, this is a
Sure.
very, very ordinary, trivial piece of knowledge that is not
Sure.
something
So
new.
there should be an ordinary trivial answer. I haven't heard it
Yeah.
yet. We should answer the question rather
Sorry?
than
No, no, no.
skirt.
Well,
Yeah.
when you said, what are your thoughts about this? That was my first thought. You haven't
Oh,
posed
okay.
a direct
Sure.
question to me. So you just said, what are your thoughts about this? One thing I
Okay.
notice is so if you started off with this kind of a spiel in a climate science conference, for example, it's not going to be revolutionary. Let's just say that. I'm not saying particularly to you. I'm just saying if anyone said that,
Yeah.
it's not
Sure.
going to be
Sure.
a particularly revolutionary idea. So let's bear that in mind. Right. So in terms of the CO2, so in terms of CO2 being good, well, and CO2 being plant food, it's one of the things that plants require. But again, paying attention in biology class, we know that it's not the only thing. Plants need nutrients. Plants also need water. Yes, you're right. That if the other things are plentiful and available, and there's no limiting factor on nutrients and water, having more CO2 does, in majority of cases, well, maybe even plurality of cases, depending on the type of plant, it does lead to more plant growth. So, for example, in a greenhouse, if you have, say, I don't know, 150 parts per million and some greenhouses, in like botanical gardens, they will pump in CO2 because plants do require that. If you grow a plant in a 150 ppm parts per million environment and measure the height of the plant, and then measure it in another greenhouse, a similar plant, in 300 parts per million, it wouldn't be surprising, and in many cases, the plant will grow higher than that. That's true.
Yeah.
But it's not the only factor, and not all of the plants are sensitive to this. And it's not as if it's not. There's a tapering factor, so it's not linear. It's not like you keep increasing the CO2 and the plant will keep growing. It flattens off at a certain point. It's like, I may like popcorn, I may
Do you
like
know this
grape.
point? Which
Sorry.
point is this? Which
It's
point are you
again,
talking about?
this has been it differs with different plants, but I'm giving an analogy. I like grapes, I like popcorn, some of my favorite food. I can eat a lot of them, but there'll be a tapering off point where after 5 hours of eating it, I'll be like, okay, I've had enough. I'm not going to have any more. Similarly, a plant will also have that. Obviously, a plant doesn't have a consciousness or will, but desire, but it can't grow. If you keep giving it CO2, it's not going to come to the, like a 500-foot plant. There is a leveling off factor there. And that
Sure.
differs for different plants. So there's what's called C1, C2, I think C3 and C4 plants, as I recall. So these are different categories of plants. Not all plants are the same. I mean, all plants require carbon dioxide, but how sensitive they are to the carbon dioxide, it differs. So for example, C3 plants are more sensitive to this increase. So when I mentioned if you grow a plant in 150 parts per million greenhouse and a 300 parts per million greenhouse, and there'll be a difference, that difference was more marked and more significant if the plant is a C3 type of plant rather than if it's a C4
So
type of
there's
plant. Because
let me understand. So you've got these
yeah,
different kinds of plants that need different
yeah,
amounts of carbon dioxide, and
yes.
is there a point where are you saying because are you saying the current levels of carbon dioxide are harming any of those categories of plants, as far as you know?
The current levels of carbon dioxide,
Yeah, because
no, they're not. It's not. A
sure.
plant won't be harmed by too much. It just won't. When you're saying that the world is growing or CO2 is
Hmm.
plant food, there's a tapering effect because one, the
Yeah, what is
continuation of
that
that,
level? Do you know?
it differs for different plants. It differs for different plants. So C3
Sure,
levels are different, C4 plants are different. There's been quite a lot of studies on this. You can easily, if you search
sure.
C3 and C4 plants tapering off, it can differ. So, but the larger argument that this is building towards is if we're
Yeah.
saying CO2 is plant food and it's
Hmm.
okay, we can basically, let's assume the claim is, let's, not worry about how much CO2 we're putting into the atmosphere. Let's just let it go. Uh, and then the claim is we'll get more and more plants. We'll get more and more agriculture. We'll get more and more harvest because
Hmm.
CO2 is plant food. That argument doesn't hold because there's a tapering off effect after a certain
What is
level.
that tapering off effect? Because
We
it
won't get it.
seems to be the dinosaur argument that I gave, of prehistoric data, tells you that actually we're far away from that tapering off effect because we need 10 times the amount of carbon dioxide before we can get to the dinosaur levels. And the dinosaur levels were really good, far more vegetative growth, far more you know, what's it called, biomass of the animal, because obviously the diplodocus and the Tyrannosaurus rex were huge, right? So it supported a lot more diversity and
Yes, but
yeah,
so
life.
humans weren't alive at that time. So then the problem is not that if you sort of um, suddenly appeared and suddenly could transport yourself into the Jurassic period and you were
Mm,
there, okay, maybe that could be fine. You won't like choke to death in the CO2 or something like this, but I don't think so. But the problem is we have a human civilization that's spread across the world in very
mm,
low-lying areas like Bangladesh, for example. So if we
sure.
go from here, so 300 parts, what are we now? 420 parts per million, roughly
Mhm.
in the world at the moment. If you go from 420 to 720, it's not just going to be the only thing that happens is that we get more agriculture because, as I said, it tapers off. And number two, it
So
has
sea level rise is like 1 or 2 millimeters per year, something ridiculously small. Anyway, it's got plenty of time to react to those. But are you? That's kind of a different issue. The real issues we're starting off with is CO2 bad for the environment at higher levels? You know, like,
sorry,
is
say
it
that.
bad for the plants? You haven't said it's bad for the plants. You said it was really basic information
Yes, yeah.
for
It's not
global. You know,
as far as we know. As far as we
yeah.
know, there won't be any situation. Well, as far as I've looked into, like even if it's 2,000 parts per million, that's not going to
Mm,
mean that that at some point CO2 becomes poisonous to the plants. As far as we know, that's not the case. But
sure.
what I'm saying is that's only one consideration. How fast plants grow is only one consideration of how suitable the Earth is for humans to live on it. There are other considerations like how fast the sea level rises. And if CO2 is great, how much habitat destruction will happen to other, for example, like bees that need to pollinate the plants. And these kind of things would have been okay in the ecosystem for the dinosaurs because dinosaurs lived in different ways to humans, but humans, we live near rivers. We need transport, we need sea levels
Mhm.
to be roughly the same. So we are more sensitive to sea level changes and CO2 changes than the dinosaurs were. And also, again, maybe the dinosaurs, again, I've not checked my figures on this. My understanding is they would have maybe come to 1,800 parts per million or 2,000 parts per million over, I don't know, a million years. It would have been much slower. Whereas what we're doing is we've gone from whenever it was, before 1950, maybe 200 parts per million to 420 parts per million in 50 years with billions of people in low-lying areas in Bangladesh, around Pakistan, the floods, and around glaciers and droughts and so on. So we are very exposed in a way that you know um, dinosaurs didn't have a civilization. We have a civilization that's very sensitive. So these are the things that we have to take into account. It's not only the fact that
But I said the
CO2
sea
will
level
never,
rises very slowly. We can adapt to it, and in fact,
that's
like
well,
you said, we need more
what's that
water as
what's
well.
that based
So
on?
yeah,
What's that based on? I mean, that's
yeah.
not for
So
the
that's
studies that
that's
I've seen.
official information. 1 to 3 millimeters per year. It's very slow sea level rise. These are official
Slow
numbers.
compared to, I mean, compared to what?
Yeah,
Because
it's slow enough for
I've
us
seen.
to react. I'm sure
Is
we
that
can
your
react.
is that
Yeah.
your opinion? Or because I've seen World Bank studies, IMF studies, even like real estate companies here in the UK are planning for
Mhm.
the Thames in London to rise, and then that's going to affect the pricing of the
Does it
high
make sense
luxury
to you?
apartment
I
blocks.
mean, let's think about it logically. You know, there could be all sorts of ulterior motives. So let's consider it ourselves. Just logically for a few minutes.
Sure, sure,
We could
sure.
be wrong, but a couple of millimeters per year. Do you think we can't react to that?
So your appeal to common sense is understandable, but
Hmm.
common sense is not science. I mean, we common sense once dictated that
Oh,
the sun
logic.
went
Just
around the
logic.
earth. No, but
What logic?
logic based on common sense. What I'm giving you, well, there's not only one type of logic. There's
Hmm.
several types of logic. Your
Hmm.
logic is, well, in my day-to-day life, 2 or 3 millimeters is kind of like how much my nail grows or how my hair grows. So therefore, I don't have to worry about it. That's kind of the approach
Sure.
that claim is taking. There's another logic that says, well, let's do some studies, let's do some empirical evidence saying if there are going to be whatever it is amount of centimeters, millimeters of sea level rise, what has that happened in the past? and what would happen, for example, to the dams or water barriers, say, for example, the Thames barrier that keeps the North Sea from coming down the Thames and London. And again, this is not something that only I'm coming up with now. As I say, the IMF, the World Bank have done studies. These are hardly sort of leftist, progressive, tree-hugging, hippie organizations. And they've expressed serious concern there's going to be hundreds of millions, billions worth of damage because we can't adapt fast enough to the consequences of sea level rise, both in terms of refugee populations, flooding of agricultural plains, etc., and also rising of the water table. That also has other effects, for example, in overcoming flood barriers and so on. So the common sense logic is understandable, but that's not the only way we can think about it. There are several types of logic that we can pursue.
Sure. So we're trusting all these big organizations that a lot of us
As opposed to your common sense of just one person who is
Oh, it's not just one person. Lots of people who have this opinion of
okay, but
studying.
what other organized? Okay, but let's do again, a sensible thing to do would be
Yeah.
Rather than just sort of picking a confirmation bias of the favored study that we've looked at.
Well, that's what
Let's
you
look
just
at
did. You chose
no, no,
people
no.
that you confirm
No,
your
I'm
beliefs.
saying the majority, from what I've seen, the majority of studies that have looked at this are ones that are predicting hundreds of millions, billions, whether it's not as if, again, let's say, it doesn't mean that human civilization will be wiped out. I'm sure there'll be humans that survive. It's just, how can we adapt to millions, hundreds of millions of people displaced and billions worth of damage? Or can we try and limit that to maybe tens of thousands of people displaced and only millions of damage? That's the difference. If you're suggesting, well, no, humankind is still.
I'm giving the opposite picture. I'm saying we're going to flourish because we're going to have more vegetative growth because we've got a lot of desertification, so more water we welcome. We're effectively in a relative ice age compared to much hotter temperatures at the time of the dinosaurs, where there was way
Sorry,
more biomass.
where have we got the certification that's going to be fixed by increasing global temperatures? What area? What geographical
So
area?
basic plant life. You need more water. You need more carbon
Sorry,
dioxide,
that's not
and we've got historical evidence that it created.
that's not answering my question. Sorry. What
Sorry, go on.
geographical area? So, for example, Pakistan will be a geographical area, or the Sahara, or the Amazon. What geographical area in your studies will be improved from the current desertification to having more water?
If I was just thinking off the top of my head, places like Libya, for
Well,
example. Yeah.
let's
So Libya has
let's.
been
Are
trying
you are
very
you are
hard.
you guessing? Are you guessing, or have you actually seen a study to say
Oh
that?
no, I haven't seen a study, but I
Okay,
think
let's be clear
logically
about
we
that.
can
Okay.
see more
No, no,
water
okay,
is
that's fine. Let's
yeah.
be clear about it, and then let's say we're speculating.
Sure. I mean,
Okay.
the climate science is based on predictions on facts we can't really support in the first place. There are all sorts of predictions like this will
Sorry,
happen.
sorry.
So most of
Say that
climate
again.
science is depending or claiming all sorts of drastic weather changes that we don't really have evidence for. It's like, oh, it will get worse, and but we don't have evidence. We have
Do you
actually counter
understand?
evidence. We've got the dinosaur times when life flourished
Yeah,
instead.
sorry. I think there's a serious logical
Yeah,
fallacy here.
sure.
If predictions are for the
Yeah,
future, we can't have
sure.
evidence for predictions, right? Because things that haven't
Oh, so
happened yet.
you can make any prediction you want then in that on that rate at that rate.
No, no. Again, that's a misunderstanding of predictions and stance, I think. But if I can only have evidence for things that have already happened. I can't have evidence for future things, right? That's a
Yeah,
basic logical thing. So when you
sure.
say that there's not evidence for predictions, I think what you mean to say is, or what I understood is, what the steel man of that is that the predictions that are being made are not based on any historical evidence of the Earth behaving
Yeah,
in that
they're
way.
against the historical evidence. Yeah.
Okay, so what historical evidence are you looking at that says that um, sea level won't rise, for example,
Oh no,
in
no,
the
sea level rising is good. We need more
okay,
water.
so what historical evidence do you think the climate science predictions are based on that is being misrepresented?
So I think there's also sort of ulterior motive to create people,
I'm not asking about motives.
fear.
I'm saying what is the evidence. We'll talk
And
about
then,
motives
what is the
later.
evidence? So, like, we know things like, the Grand Canyon used to be full of water and stuff like that. So we had a lot more water, and at that same time, those prehistoric times, we also had a lot more life. So we can see there's a picture where you could be living on different areas, maybe living in the Grand Canyon, where right now people don't really live in the Grand Canyon or on the top of the Grand Canyon. So we could be living in a lot more different places with more water, and we know when there was more water and more carbon, there was a lot more life. That's just well-known science that at the time of the dinosaurs, there was a lot more life.
No,
Um,
I'm not sure that there was a lot more. I'm not sure what you mean by a lot more life. Define.
Biomass,
You
things
mean
like
more?
that.
Really?
You could it's very quick to Google. We know like animals were far
Mhm.
bigger. How do you get far bigger animals? Is when you have more vegetative
Okay,
to
okay,
grow
but
to feed on and stuff like that.
just because individual animals were bigger in size
Mhm.
doesn't mean that the overall biomass was the same. I can't record figures
Oh,
off the top
I've
of my head.
searched it. The overall biomass was
Okay, right.
far
Okay,
far
why?
more
But
than
why is that important? Because what end goal do we want? It's not.
more life.
We're not looking at least from my perspective as a human. And I would
Mm,
want human civilization to flourish. I think you also want that as well. The
mm,
overall biomass could increase, but humans could be stuffed. I mean, humans could be screwed. Humans may actually reduce in population and
mm,
struggle, and a lot of people could be displaced, and there could be a lot of suffering and mass death and draw and starvation, which is what's being predicted. That could still happen, but the world biomass could still increase. Cockroaches could increase, locusts could increase, and so on. So that's not what we're looking at. The climate science predictions are warning for difficulties ahead for human civilization in the way that it's spread out across the world now, living in places like now, for example. So
mm,
if you live in Bangladesh, a very low-lying area that's close to sea level, and the sea level rises, the way that people have lived for the past 100 years is going to change drastically, and in ways that's unfair to them because they're not the ones that have polluted the majority of the pollution that humans have produced over the past 100 years into the atmosphere. That's a social justice issue. So we are trying to address that.
mm,
That's not really relevant to whether the overall biomass increases or not, or the world
mm.
greens or not. And actually, as you may know, the greening of the world mostly it increases in biomass in the Arctic regions, for example, like Siberia,
No,
in the Arctic Circle.
green. No, no, that's actually completely wrong.
It's not increasing in the Sahara. Okay, well, what's your
No.
evidence for?
So I've posted videos for basically it says Amazon particularly is greening more as well.
No, I'm not. That's not what I said. I'm saying
Ah,
I'm not saying that the Amazon is not greening. I'm
yeah.
saying
I'm
the
saying
world the
yeah,
world is green. The world is greening, but the
yeah.
majority of that greening is happening first of all in the Arctic Circle, where the big forests are, because most of the world's
Is that what you've seen?
total.
Because that's not the evidence I've seen. I've seen very
Okay,
different evidence. Yeah.
yeah, I can share that later. I
Sure.
can search in a bit.
Sure. Yeah, exactly. So
So for
for
example,
people
like
who
Siberia,
don't,
so
yeah, go
yeah,
on.
so the the forest that's called the lungs of the world, where do you think that is?
I don't know. Siberia, do you say?
Yes, exactly, Siberia.
Oh,
Yeah. So
okay.
the big boreal forests and so on, the biomass, a lot of that is the Amazon is also very big, obviously,
Mm,
and there's other, but usually in the tropical zone, even though there is more sunlight, that doesn't mean that there aren't other bigger forests in other parts of the world in other latitudes. So
mm.
the most of the greening has been observed from the studies that I've read in that area. Number one. Number two, a lot of the biomass increasing is not actually productive or it's not actually helpful for human agriculture. Again, it may be great for cockroaches and for grasshoppers and for locusts, and a lot of it is in weeds because, as we might know from gardening, weeds don't
Mm.
need a lot of tending. It's not increasing in rice. It's not increasing in, soya or other things that humans actually depend on. So the world will be fine in
So
some sense.
you're claiming that it won't help grow more things for us. So you're saying
Not
it won't help with rice. It won't help with even though rice needs more water and things
it's
like that.
not it's not a binary issue of it will help or it won't help. I'm just saying
Oh,
the majority.
it might not. You're saying.
it will help to a lesser extent. The majority
Oh,
of the greening and the
mm,
majority of the increase in biomass is going to be in things that don't directly stimulate or don't directly feed human civilizational growth.
how do you
It
know
would be
that?
in that's in the studies that I've looked at.
Oh, okay, okay.
Of
So you,
the greening studies in, for example, the boreal forests, in the the weeds, the lowlands, the grasslands. These are not
okay,
area. I mean, they're good for humans to take a walk in. I mean, I love going on
sure.
heaths or
I know, but
grasslands.
we don't eat most things directly. We don't eat grass, but even if grass grows more, that's good.
But we do eat, but we do, yeah, it's true. I mean, then we can
Yeah.
have cows and so on, but we do eat
Mm,
a lot of things that do directly grow. So, for example, we have to
sure.
take wheat or flour and things like this. It's not, as from my understanding is, it's not as if, so for example, Ukraine is called the breadbasket of the world. You know, its fields of
Mm,
wheat are infamous. The
mm,
greening of the world won't have some kind of significant increase in the amount of wheat that Ukraine can
yeah.
produce, because it's not in the right zone. The greening is mostly going towards the northern Arctic Circle, sort of that kind of zone in those
I mean,
boreal
that's also
forests.
good, by the way. Anyway, if the Arctic
Well,
Circle greens more. Yeah.
good or bad are relative terms. What we're talking about more specifically
Yeah.
is what's going to help human flourishing as we get
Yeah.
another billion people or whatever the population projections are, as we increase and as we not only, even if we don't increase population that much, we're consuming more per individual. So
Mm,
the consumption of fossil fuels and energy per person 50 years ago is more than it is now. So even if population doesn't grow, we're becoming more energy intensive individuals. So we have to
mm,
account for that. That's, and whether that can grow at that rate, that's the problem. It's not a question of apocalyptic things where there's going to be no humans left alive or the world's going to burn or it's going to be on fire. These
mm,
are kind of, they're not, it's not about that, well, and God will protect the earth or humankind will survive. I'm sure humans will survive, but
mm,
well, humans can survive a nuclear war, but that doesn't mean that a nuclear war is a good thing. We want to try
mm.
and mitigate,
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
understand. We want to understand the changes that are happening, and we want to try and see what level of damage can be mitigated in the interest of saving human lives and human
Sure.
suffering.
So I was getting the opposite picture. I wasn't talking about survival. I was talking about thriving, because, like I've demonstrated in my arguments, we would have more of the ingredients for life anyway. So why wouldn't it help us? It would make more sense that it would help us
Because
rather than.
as I explained, life can increase, biomass can increase, but that doesn't mean that human civilization will find it easier to live.
Yeah. Okay.
Those
All
aren't the
right. So
same
I
thing.
wanted to. Yeah, I think you're just repeating the verse that I quoted. Actually, is that a different verse? No, it's the same verse. Yeah. I'm just thinking if he's saying anything new. This can happen until we evolve further past being human. Being human. Okay. I'm not sure. Okay. Anyway, so what I want to wind up with before we have our kind of casual whatever conversation about life, our own lives directly, um, is the argument I made was that we tend to panic, especially if you don't believe we are taken care of by God, which is a very reasonable thing to believe, considering the incredible balance in the environment, the perfect distance we are from the earth, and all these unbelievable things, right, that are maintaining our lives. It makes sense that God hasn't just set it up, but He continues to keep it going, and we can see that that all sorts of things are, like oil was found to maintain the energy requirements that we have. Like you were talking about, we have increased energy requirements. I don't know how we would have managed without oil for the last 100 years. So there's so many things that if we step back and if we do believe in God, which is the most reasonable thing to believe in, then we can start seeing patterns that show that, oh, look, carbon is greening the earth. It is solving all the major worries that we had, about are we going to be able to maintain human life on Earth, etc. Right? Because there's the answer. We've got more resources coming our way through carbon, etc. So I suppose that the question I want to ask is, can you see that you're resisting a lot of very reasonable arguments and a ton of evidence, millions of years of evidence that global warming is good for us, carbon is good for us, and we are being actually taken care of by
No,
God.
Khalid, I'm quite disappointed. You're not. I think you're not understanding the argument that I'm presenting. We have to try and when I say increase in biomass and increase in life generally does not mean that humans will find it easier to live. Do we understand each other on that? Because I think that's really important. Because it seems like
Mm,
you're you just have a mental block on that and you're just skipping over it and saying, well, CO2 has always been around and CO2 has been around for millions of years and the dinosaurs had lots of CO2. But that's not, there's a logical gap that we really need to be slow, patient, considerate, and make sure that we nail this down because it's absolutely crucial. Just because other organisms, including plants, can
mm,
flourish does not mean that humans will find it easier to flourish. I understand that you may have faith. You may have faith saying, even if there's a million people on the run from rising sea levels, we'll find out, we'll make a way because God's favored us. We'll work it out somehow. I understand if that's your faith, but there's nothing unreasonable that I'm not looking at. I'm trying to present the reasonable argument. So when
mm,
you say we will have more resources or
mm,
CO2 will make it easier for us to live, that's
mm,
not based on any evidence for human civilization because humans have never lived like this. The dinosaurs and what they lived in is it's only relevant up to a point because there weren't 8 billion people living on the earth at that
mm,
time in low lying areas. So we have to look at what are our aims. Our aims are reducing human suffering, reducing
mm,
human loss of life, and ensuring human flourishing. These are the three aims. So let's look at how increasing CO2, as per your wish, is going to achieve those three aims. So, how is increasing CO2 going to reduce human suffering when we have evidence that Bangladesh is already, I mean, it's not people are in, Palau, in the other Pacific islands. One of their prime ministers recently gave a press conference on like with his knees up to water because he's saying we live on low-lying land where a couple of millimeters in a global sense of rising actually can cause quite a lot of rise for an individual island, and then their
mm,
houses will be underwater. These people aren't imagining that's happening to them, right? So how
mm.
is that going to reduce that human suffering? We really need to understand this. It's not about saying CO2 is somehow good for plant life and therefore something humans will flourish. We have to really be understand the mechanisms here.
So we don't know for sure, right? But logically or reasonably, the more vegetative life is being created, as we've seen in global greening, which you can see from space. Some people are denying that it's happening or something. Um, so NASA's provided that evidence.
Well, I
Um,
agree.
so,
The world is
like,
greening.
what's more logical based on what we do know, right? Like, we know that more vegetation creates more life, and if you really want evidence, you can go, okay, since we started farming thousands of years ago, has it helped us, you know, develop more than we were when we were just hunters, I guess. Without is there hunter gatherer and farmer is like farming is beyond hunter gathering, right? So I think we did better since we started farming.
So if I can try and focus on our question again,
Yeah,
if the three things are reducing human suffering, reducing human loss of life, and flourishing for the future, right? So
sure.
we're on the first point, and you've gone to there'll be more plants. So I think what
No,
you're
no, you
saying
said
there is,
that as well. You are
Mhm.
questioning
and
if greater biomass would be better for human beings as well, and I'm saying the chances are yes. I would say, yeah,
well,
from all our experience for thousands of years, creating more food for us actually helped us, and we're living longer.
sure, right, but I think that's an oversimplification. Food is one of the things. So
Yeah,
plants require CO2, that's right. They
yeah.
also require more water and they also require nutrients. Just because the world is, and I said, just because the world is greening from the past 50 years to now, doesn't mean that it will linearly go like that forever, first of all, because there could be other limiting factors. One
Hmm.
could be the availability of water, and there are severe water droughts in many parts of the world that didn't have them before. So, for example, in the Middle East, people are seeing temperatures and droughts in water and crop failures that they've not seen for in living memory in more than 100 years. So that's a problem. The next thing is, even if we somehow do have more agriculture and we have
Mm,
no, so for example, we'll have all the rice that we need or all of the
mm,
flour that we need to make bread, even if that's the problem, even if that problem is solved, that's not the only thing that human civilization needs to flourish. It also needs shelter, it also needs firm ground, it also needs sea levels not to be, and storms, for example. So the frequency of, or the intensity, or and how often we get really, really bad category, whatever it is, the highest category of storms, that frequency is increasing because of the hot water and colder air and hot air in behavior and the dynamics of that in the major oceans. So we're seeing more of them. That's going to increase, again, based on past evidence. So it's not the only, just because we have, if we leave your view, just because we have more, agriculture, that doesn't mean that human civilization is going to be flourished. We can have more agriculture and tens of millions of people could still die. Right? I wouldn't count that as success in the next 50, 100 years. So that's a real problem. We need to address that.
cool. Okay. So I don't like to break my promises. I think we shared different arguments on both sides, and that was fantastic, I think, right? I like that Alavari is very articulate in expressing the strongest arguments from the arguments that he had in mind, or at least, well, let's say, from his point of view. So that's great having him here. How's life?
Well, it's been a pretty good week compared to last month. It's for me with asylum seeker support work, which is still ongoing, just because of the dire situation here. But otherwise, yeah, this weekend's been fairly okay. I've had to step back from martial arts, unfortunately, which is a big part of my kind of daily or weekly nourishment, and it's an important part of my meditation. So I'm missing that because of charity work and asylum seeker
Mm,
support work commitments. But I still have my yoga every day, and my other meditation. So yeah, I'm doing well. It's we've got summer along the way here. Climate change wise, that we're having quite a lot of um, an earlier summer and a longer summer here in the UK than we otherwise usually would, but enjoying it for what it's worth.
sure, cool, good. Um, yeah, so for people who don't know, why do I keep asking Alavari how's life? Is because our discussion started with my belief, at least, and maybe Alavari agrees, that men don't really spend enough time chilling and talking to each other. Especially, I find in the West over here, we've got massive coffee shops and people are chilling out, men chilling out with each other every evening. They are relatively slow, and I've yet to learn from them. I think I work a bit harder than maybe I should. Who knows? So yeah, this is kind of what's behind that. And also, we when somebody says how are you doing, and somebody the other person isn't feeling great, people generally don't feel the the that somebody's interested in hearing that they're not great, which is a problem as well. You know, so it's good to be able to express your emotions both ways, and that's really important. I think generally just being interested in each other is really important. So cool.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah. So what makes you pleased about your? I mean, I think it's fantastic what you're doing with trying to help people out. Um, in what was it like? Is it people from Iran or where from particularly who are
Yeah, it's a
paying?
mix of Iran, Afghanistan, Syria, because this originally started with the Syrian civil war breaking out,
Mm,
and then that was in 2011, but then it took a long time, 2017, 16, 15, for our prime minister here to make an official program to welcome and resettle refugees, which I think it was way too late and definitely called for, given my country, the UK's involvement in Middle East geopolitics that's spurred on many of these crises. And actually,
mm,
linking back to climate change, I mean, one of the kind of fueling factors that led up to the civil war, as I understand it, was drought and climate change that caused crop
Which one?
failures in
Syrian
in
civil
Syria,
war?
in the outlying, in the more rural areas of Syria,
Hmm.
years before the civil war. That then caused those farmers and those kind of, I guess, rural dwellers to come more into the cities because they needed jobs, they needed work, and in those kind of shanty towns and in the informal dwellings and those kind of very low development areas around Damascus, around the cities that
Hmm.
you get, that's where that provided a fertile breeding ground for ISIS propaganda, basically, and then that
Oh,
led to protests, and then so these are all, a lot of it are
I
connected.
had
So
a
when we
different picture
say,
because I've got half Syrian family. They
hmm,
said that the real problems were Israeli jet fighters purposely bombing wheat fields. But
it could
that's a
be.
different
Oh,
picture.
well, I
It's
mean,
hard to say.
that's also been happening, yeah,
Yeah.
since '67, and there's been a lot of Israel seems to act with impunity there in the Middle East, and that's also, but that's in some sense been a constant because that's
Mm,
it had been happening since Israel took over the Golan Heights in '67. But yes, I mean, together with a worsening climate and not enough
mm,
water, if Israel is still doing that, then finally the straw could have broken the camel's back, and that's what caused. And again, no one likes, even within a country, no one likes to
mm.
be displaced, and no one wants to come over, and let
That's
alone
true.
from the outskirts to Damascus, because they've, especially Arabs, they have a lot of tribal links to where they grew up, and their names are
And they're
connected to
very
it.
close to land as well.
They're very
Yeah.
close linked. They're very close to their land, their animals, their mountains, and so on. So no one likes to be moved. So that already caused them discontent, and then you have kind of the propaganda being whipped up, and Islamic revolutionary fundamentalist talk and anti-governmental talk. So then that led to a melting pot, a crucible, where it just needed that one spark to strike, which was government repression of
Mm.
protests, and that led to a civil war.
Let me
And
jump
then,
into
hmm,
a question I really like from Claire, our secular Quranist friend. What kind of meditation do you do, AJ? Tell me about it. Let's go into depth. It'd be really interesting.
yeah, I think maybe we did cover this before, but if not, I I have I guess, a Zen Buddhist understanding to meditation, in that I do eyes closed, sitting still, that kind of traditional stereotypical meditation. I do that for 30 minutes a day. But I also count drawing as my meditation, like free drawing, just kind of free, without planning anything, just sort of letting the pen scribble on the iPad, on the paper in this case. So just doing that, just letting the mind clear with no music, with no other stimulation or input, just drawing. That also I count as meditation. I mean, in China and Japan, the
Why do
tea
you think that
ceremonies,
works? I
the
can imagine it works for certain reasons, but I'm intrigued. Why do you think the free
I
drawing
think it's just
works?
a different way of expressing, because a lot of I mean, maybe for an artist, it wouldn't be much of a different if you spend all of your day painting and that's your main job, maybe not. Or maybe if you're a, decorator, you spend most of your day painting walls, I guess that wouldn't be much of a difference. But for me, most
Mm,
of my day is with text and figures and data and analysis and computers
mm,
and typing and messaging. So that's all kind of one way of thinking. Whereas, maybe I guess a different, different modules in my brain, different parts of my brain, and different thought pathways would be in, okay, how can I capture some kind of pleasing, pattern with my,
When did
that's
you
not
last
using an
do that?
alphabet.
When did you last do this free drawing exercise?
Oh, this morning.
Cool. I'm intrigued. What did you end up drawing?
I think this morning I was just trying to, again, a lot of it is just sort of, it could be just sort of scribbling patterns. It could be kind of just very repetitive, almost kind of, um, sometimes the patterns that autistic people can produce. It could be something like that. Sometimes I do draw,
Well,
like maybe my
do you remember what
sandal
you drew?
or my,
Do you have any
sorry?
idea? Do
I
you
don't,
remember
I,
what you drew this morning?
it was, I can't really describe it. It was just a nonsense pattern and just, the scribbles. Yeah. I used to keep all of them, but then I just ran out of space on my, because it's an iPad, so it's quite high quality files. So I just started deleting them, because the point is not to actually make something. The point is the actual process, is the discipline. So I do that. So that was a part of my, maybe tomorrow I can share mine with you. Um, the,
But maybe
so that
sharing it would have a negative effect because
would have a negative
you
effect, exactly, because then I know that I'm
there's
going.
the
Well, I used
judgment
to
or
do it. No, I
whatever.
used to do it because
Yeah.
I was with a group of people who I haven't, because I've done yoga, which I also count as meditation. So I do yoga, silent
Yeah.
sitting, eyes closed, and silent drawing.
Yeah.
daily kind of meditation. And I also count my martial arts, that when I get into that flow state and rolling with someone and just having that sparring, I also count that as meditation. So, but that's, I do a couple of times a week. So my daily meditation is three: silent sitting, eyes closed, um, yoga, and the drawing. The drawing is the one that I started most recently, maybe a year before the pandemic, I would say, something like that. And that was with a group that asked me to join them, and they were sharing in WhatsApp what we draw every day. So we were doing that, and then suddenly, like, we just got, my phone
Yeah.
storage just got too full. Then we
The
stopped
reason
doing
why I
it,
was
and
intrigued by what you drew is because, like sometimes we contemplate on our dreams, for example,
yeah.
and what comes out subconsciously actually tells you a lot about what's important to you. So I thought, oh, it would be
Sometimes,
interesting.
yeah, sometimes I do see that if I'm quite,
Yeah.
depending on how tense I am, what patterns
Yeah.
I like to draw. If I'm more relaxed, maybe I'll draw like just very kind of smooth and
Yeah. I
open
can imagine.
strokes and things.
Yeah.
If I'm just more okay, I just really want to focus on something, and I'm just trying to, and it's difficult because I think it's more the act of doing the same thing every day, each day. We kind of take a pulse of how we're feeling. It's kind of like brushing our
Mm,
teeth, but it doesn't last too long. But half an hour of doing that thing, that allows us, okay, I did this yesterday and it is the day before. Now I'm feeling different. And actually, it gives us a mirror to just look at ourselves and just to check, okay, how am I feeling? I mean, today, am I feeling like it's a chore? Or am I feeling, okay, it's quite relaxed? Or am I feeling, oh God, I've got to do half an hour of this and I've got to get to my first meeting? Then that gives us a barometer of how we're feeling at that time. So part of it is the actual doing of it, but part of it is just a discipline of, regardless of what we do. I mean, it could be silent sitting, eyes closed, it could be yoga, it could be running. But it's also how we approach it, and the fact that we're coming to do it every day, and that discipline gives us a chance to reflect on how we're feeling. It gives us that kind of window into our day. So that's also useful for me. So yeah, that's what I do every day.
that's cool. I've got another. There's another thing that I love that Claire's pointed out. Um, which I think one of the reasons why podcasts are becoming important is people are not able to really share what they feel. They're not saying exactly what they need to feel. And so these kind of little forums that we create where we're like, I don't want to call it aggressively, but just openly just saying whatever our point of view, and we can disagree and we still keep this going. I think it must be very therapeutic to just say what you want to say. People are so scared
Mhm.
nowadays about saying what they need to say. So that's kind of, I think
Yeah.
that's
Yeah, and
really
sometimes like
important.
our Quran classes and my Gita classes on Tuesdays, and the other classes that I do, evening study classes with other people online that are open-minded and just we're able to listen. That's very therapeutic. Or even, and also, like, just being around other people, like you say, having that social time, hugging, being joking around with friends, um, going for walks. All of these things can be meditation. All of these things can help our mindfulness, and we're deprived of that when we're overworked,
Mm,
overstressed, and the economic situations of our lives are so. I'm very privileged. I can work from home. I've been working from home since 2017. Very
mm,
flexible. Okay, the charity work that I do, it can be stressful sometimes, but because I have such an easy rest of my life, I kind of feel an obligation to, okay, if someone is uh, one of my asylum
I get where
seekers
you're
that I'm
coming from.
helping, that I'm
I
helping
think they,
support, yeah,
yeah.
they have like serious mental health concerns and issues. One of them tried to commit suicide last month, and luckily we caught her at the right time. So these kind of things, if I didn't have the privilege and the luxury of all of these other ways to recharge my batteries, then I wouldn't be able to do those things. And that's a privilege
Mm,
that I have. Many people don't. Many people can barely even just, you know, get the kids ready in the morning, go to work, and then the weekend is like, okay, doing all the chores and washing for the next week, and it just carries on like that. What kind of a life is that? It's
mm.
so I have the privilege, so I think I have to do my bit.
Yeah, yeah. There's a whole bunch of stuff that I like to say about that. For example, even though it's a privilege to do that, let's say charity work, but it pays back so much more in its own way. You develop in different ways. You actually experience talking to people personally in ways that you wouldn't otherwise. But I want to keep digging into. There's something else I wanted to say about what Claire pointed out. The secular Quran is. Um, it's not just about saying what you want to say, because on Twitter, people are often arguing aggressively and saying what they want to say. But I think there's something important that we talked about one or two sessions, or whatever you want to call it, streams ago, where people need to listen and be interested more in what the other person is saying, even if it's not what you want to hear. That's really important, because otherwise you're only talking within a very narrow echo chamber, and that's not actually helpful, because the echo chamber, I think, become more and more narrow. It's like, oh, you're not allowed to say this and you're not allowed to say that, and then you eventually become suffocated. And it's really important to be able to express whatever you want to express, and have people listen to that and see how that might be true. And yeah, I mean, so you don't slowly become suffocated.
Yes, and I think we having fora like these, like our Quran study classes, are really important for it's also a therapy in itself to be able to grapple with issues, to be able to, okay, how what do I often find, I mean, similar to I think what Claire was saying, I often find, not that I feel necessarily relaxed or good about it, I just feel satisfied that in trying to express something, in trying to have a discussion like this, it distills ideas. As you know, I'm a big fan
Mm.
of note taking, and then I'll go and then take some notes, and I'll have a class note. I'll find some way of capturing our discussions. So then the next time this comes around, I don't have to start from zero. You know, I've already got some kind of a
Mm.
base to start from, because then it feels like I'm actually progressing in my understanding in life. And now we have many tools, I mean, online tools and cloud-based software. It's very easy to share these things, collaborations. So those that kind of the discipline of trying to express oneself and articulate and see, okay, I don't actually know what I believe, and actually it's very good to have some very basic questions asked, because maybe, and I always think, am I expressing myself correctly? I try and always take that posture, because rather than blaming the other person, I'm saying, maybe I've not explained myself correctly, maybe that's why we're missing each other, so let me try again and try again and try again to just express it in the clearest way possible. And then, okay, if it's not working, fine, we can suspend, may pick it up another time. We don't have to, you know, Rome wasn't built in a day. But all of that, I think, requires a character, a sense of patience, an approach, respect for others. And that builds character, I think. I mean, that's a good life lesson to learn. And that can also have knock-on effects in relationships, in career, at work. So it's a life skill to learn, I think, as well as also being a good therapy.
Mm. Thank you very much, Alavari. Really appreciate that, your time, being open to all these challenging conversations. And I think people are enjoying it. It seems to be sparking all sorts of conversations on the side. To have people having their own conversations quite sort of
That's
parallel to
great.
ours, but a little bit also enjoying our ones as well. So thank you very much, everybody who joined in the chat as well. And catch you next week. Bye. Salam. Peace be upon
Thanks,
you all.
everyone. Alaikum salam.